Canada just released the largest economic sanctions package in history against Russia. We're talking about a true financial tsunami shaking the foundations of the Kremlin. 77 individuals sanctioned at once, 39 giant companies cut off from the international financial system, and over 900 tech products banned from entering Russian territory. But that's not all. Canada has also targeted the famous Russian Shadow Fleet, putting 201 ships on a blacklist that will keep Putin up at night. Get ready, because you're about to discover how a country known for maple syrup is literally paralyzing the most powerful conflict machine in the world. This is high-level geopolitics, and you're going to understand every detail. To understand the magnitude of what's happening, we need to go back in time. Since February 2022, when the conflict in Ukraine began, the world has witnessed a true revolution in international economic sanctions. On June 17, 2025, Canada's Foreign Minister, Anita Anand, officially announced that the country was imposing additional sanctions against 77 individuals and 39 entities under the Special Economic Measures regulations related to Russia. The announcement came during the G7 summit in Kananaskis, Alberta, and it was no coincidence. Canada chose this strategic moment to show the world that Western democracies are not just reacting, they are orchestrating a coordinated and devastatingly effective response. But here's what makes this situation truly fascinating. These are not isolated sanctions. They are part of a larger plan, a strategy refined over 3 years, now reaching its peak of sophistication. Canada is not merely following the United States and Europe. It is leading in specific areas, especially regarding combating sanctions evasion through clandestine maritime fleets. And they are doing this using a special fleet. Now, let's talk about something that sounds like it's straight out of a spy movie, but it's absolutely real: the Russian Shadow Fleet. According to specialized reports, the Shadow Fleet allowed Russia to successfully circumvent the price cap system, generating about $9.4 billion in additional revenue in 2024. Imagine for a moment hundreds of oil tankers sailing the world's oceans, carrying Russian oil, but operating under false flags, with fraudulent documentation and dubious insurance. It's as if Russia created a ghost commercial navy to dodge international sanctions. On June 17th, Canada announced a major expansion of sanctions against Russia, specifically targeting ships in the Shadow Fleet, taking action against 109 vessels based on their involvement in transporting property and goods for Russia's benefit. The strategy is brilliant and concerning at the same time. These ships don't just transport oil, they carry liquefied natural gas, military equipment, and even sensitive technological components. A 2024 congressional sanctions report revealed that, besides undermining sanctions, Russia's Shadow Fleet is suspected of conducting sabotage operations in the Baltic Sea in particular. What Canada did was essentially cut the oxygen supply to this operation. Without access to international insurance, port maintenance, and navigation services, these ships literally become ghosts of the seas, but ghosts that cannot dock anywhere. Canada is not just cutting access to obvious technologies like semiconductors and military equipment. They went much further, creating what experts are calling surgical precision sanctions. For the first time in history, we see sanctions specifically targeting the quantum computing sector. Canada identified and sanctioned Russian scientists working on quantum radar simulations, laboratories of the Moscow Institute of Quantum Technologies, and even startups like SIB Quantum. The logic behind this is terrifyingly smart. Without access to cryogenic cooling equipment and multiphoton lasers, these research centers are completely isolated. But it doesn't stop there. The package also banned nearly 1,000 dual-use items, from crucial aviation fuel additives for Su-35 fighters to biochemical enzymes that could be used in neurotoxic agents. We're talking about laser cutting tools used in manufacturing defense systems, high-strength epoxy resins for armor, and LiDAR sensors that can improve kamikaze drone precision. What makes this revolutionary is the specificity. It's not a general embargo, it's a precision operation aimed at cutting exactly the technological arteries that keep the Russian military machine running. Now, let's get to the heart of the system: the money. Canada sanctioned 3 key banks in this latest round: VTB Bank Europe SE, Navicombbank, and Gazprombank Switzerland AG. These are not just any financial institutions, they are the channels through which Russia finances its military operations. To give you an idea of the scale of the impact, these sanctions add to the already existing freeze of Russian assets worth approximately $45 billion. Thanks to energy sanctions by the EU and G7, as well as the REPowerEU policy for supply diversification and replacement of Russian imports, Russia's oil and gas revenues fell from 100 billion euros in 2022 to 22 billion in 2024, a nearly 80% reduction compared to the pre-conflict period. Furthermore, these financial institutions did more than move money for arms purchases. They were responsible for paying mercenaries, funding disinformation operations, and maintaining the entire support infrastructure for Russia's conflict effort. The result? Delayed weapons projects, compromised ammunition procurement, and a military supply chain literally drying up. What makes Canadian sanctions even more powerful is that they are not operating in a vacuum. During the G7 summit in Kananaskis, we witnessed a true geopolitical symphony performed in perfect harmony. While Canada announced its measures, the United Kingdom unveiled £1.5 billion in additional sanctions. The European Union approved its 17th sanctions list, including 154 new entities. The United States blocked semiconductor exports to specific Russian defense centers. Australia announced its own restrictive measures. What we're seeing is unprecedented in modern history, a global coordination of economic sanctions creating a web of isolation around Russia. It's as if the world's major economies decided to build an invisible but absolutely effective economic prison. And here's the most impressive fact: this coordination isn't just about foreign policy. It's about creating a new model for how democracies can respond to authoritarian aggressions in the 21st century. Now, let's get to the numbers that really matter. The impact of these sanctions on the Russian economy is not just theoretical, it's measurable and devastating. Russia's export revenues fell 20% in the last quarter. The country's international reserves plunged from $630 billion in early 2022 to approximately $400 billion in May 2025. Russia's GDP grew only 0.5% last year, a very low performance for a country that considers itself a superpower. But economic numbers tell only part of the story. On the military side, we're seeing delays in delivery of components for T-14 Armata tanks, shortages of additives for S-400 missile systems, problems with Orlan drone production, and a 15% reduction in ammunition stock. From a political perspective, the situation is even more interesting. Internal Kremlin reports point to growing dissatisfaction among oligarchs and senior defense ministry officials. The Russian elite is starting to question whether it's worth continuing a conflict costing billions of dollars and isolating the country from the rest of the world. It's like watching an economic implosion in slow motion, but an implosion directly affecting Russia's ability to sustain its military operations. But how are these economic sanctions translating into real changes on the battlefield? Ukraine is not only politically benefiting from these measures, it's taking advantage of every Russian military retreat caused by economic pressure. With less Russian artillery pressure and fewer airstrikes, Ukrainian forces have been able to retake strategic villages in Donetsk and Kherson. Reports from Ukrainian Armed Forces General Staff indicate a 25% reduction in Russian night attacks, freeing up troops for counteroffensives and allowing reinforcements to be sent to critical sectors. But the impact goes beyond direct military operations. The reduction in Russia's ability to produce and maintain military equipment is creating an opportunity window for Ukraine to modernize its own armed forces with Western equipment. It's fascinating to see how economic sanctions applied in government offices in Ottawa are directly influencing tactical movements on battlefields thousands of kilometers away. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of all this is what's coming next. Canadian sanctions are not just a response to the present, they are preparation for the future of global geopolitics. For the first time, we're seeing sanctions that anticipate technological developments. The focus on quantum computing, for example, is not about what Russia can do today, but what it could do in the next 10 to 15 years. It's a long-term strategy aimed at ensuring authoritarian regimes don't get access to technologies that could break cryptographic systems fundamental to global security. Additionally, sanctions against the shadow fleet are creating a new paradigm for combating sanctions evasion. Other countries trying to circumvent international measures, like Iran and North Korea, are watching very closely what's happening with Russia. The message is clear. The era when countries could simply create clandestine networks to dodge sanctions is coming to an end. Western democracies have developed tracking and interdiction tools that make these operations increasingly risky and costly. Canadian sanctions are not just about Russia. They are about setting precedents for how the world will deal with authoritarian aggressions in the future. China and India are watching very closely. Both countries maintain significant trade relations with Russia and are trying to navigate between Western pressure and their own economic interests. Canadian sanctions, especially those targeting the Shadow Fleet, are forcing these countries to make choices they would rather avoid. The fascinating question is, how far are these countries willing to risk their own trade relations with the West to help Russia circumvent sanctions? Canadian measures are essentially forcing an answer to this question. Moreover, we're witnessing the emergence of a new form of diplomacy through precise economic sanctions. It's as if Canada is using the global financial system as a foreign policy tool, creating real consequences for behaviors it deems unacceptable. What's the biggest lesson from all this? What do Canadian sanctions teach us about the future of global geopolitics? First, that medium-sized countries like Canada can have a disproportionate impact when acting smartly and in coordination. Canada is not a military superpower, but is using its position in the global financial system to exert real influence. Second, that the nature of deterrence has fundamentally changed. We're no longer just talking about military deterrence, we're talking about economic, technological, and financial deterrence. Canadian sanctions show that it's possible to paralyze a country's capabilities without firing a single shot. Third, that international coordination works. When democracies work together, they can create real consequences for regimes that violate international norms. And finally, that we're entering a new era of global conflict, an era where battles are fought both on battlefields and financial systems, both with tanks and sanctions. We've come to the end of this fascinating journey through the world of modern economic sanctions. What started as a response to a specific conflict has become something much bigger, a new model of how democracies can defend their values and interests in an increasingly complex world. Canadian sanctions against Russia are not just about punishing past behaviors, they are about shaping future behaviors. They are sending a clear message to any country considering violating international norms that the consequences will be real, coordinated, and devastating. Canada has shown the world that sanctions can be as powerful as tanks, that economic diplomacy can be as effective as military diplomacy, and that medium-sized countries can lead global change when they act with intelligence and determination. If Moscow wants to continue its campaign, it will have to face not only Ukrainian military resistance, but also the economic resistance of a united democratic world. And that might be the most powerful weapon of all. And if you want to stay on top of everything happening in Russia and the world, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss a single detail.